Well, I would like to welcome everybody. My name is Ariel Meller. I'm from the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Ohio, and I'm one of the people on the advocacy team of Faith Communities Go Green at Green Umbrella. I want to thank Ryan Mooney Bullock and Joanne Gerson and Rashida Manuel for allowing us to put on this forum. And I really want to express gratitude to our speakers from the nonpartisan Ohio Environmental Council, who are going to be talking today about the current legislative landscape in the great and confusing state of Ohio. We were very fortunate that Trish Demeter, the Chief of Staff of OEC, is going to speak to us today. And she is a real expert on Ohio energy policy and also served as a legislative liaison for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and a policy aide in the Ohio Senate. She was also vice president for energy policy at OEC and really has been following the unfolding realities of Ohio energy policy for a long time. We're very fortunate she's here. Chris Tavenor is one of the attorneys at OEC. He supports the legal and policy team's efforts to ensure clean air, clean water, and clean energy for the state. He also co-manages the Emerging Leaders program to engage young professionals in efforts to combat climate change, which is a very heartening activity, I'm sure, and coordinates the annual Ohio Public Interest Law Conference. And I'm excited that Chris is going to be talking about the new procedures we have for drawing legislative districts, because we all agree that gerrymandering is one of the reasons why our elected officials don't pay any attention to majority opinion on these energy issues. So with that, I'm happy to welcome Trish Demeter to give the leading talk today. Will be recorded, so you'll be able to retrieve this talk and share it with other people who couldn't attend today. Thanks, Trish.
Thank you, Ariel, and thank you everybody for inviting us here today. I think I shared my screen. I hope everybody can see this. Appreciate you all and your advocacy and your interest, your engagement. Really does start with people who care and taking from that care and putting it into action. So we're open for an open dialogue and discussion today. We both have some slides we'll walk through, but we would really like to ensure that we spend enough time or have enough time at the end to take questions and have some good discussion. So like Ariel said, I'm Trish Demeter. Ohio Environmental Council is a 52-year-old organization. Our mission is to secure healthy air, land, and water for all who call Ohio home. We are headquartered in Columbus, but we're a statewide organization. We have staff that are present in communities throughout the state: Cleveland metro area, Northeast Ohio, Northwest Ohio, Southeast Ohio, and also Southwest Ohio. We're actually in the process of hiring a Cincinnati or Southwest regional director. Hopefully when we make an announcement of who that is, you all can get to know that person as a representative of our family of organizations. How we do our work is really kind of embedded in various different buckets. And when I say we're a family of organizations, we do have a political arm called the OEC Action Fund, which engages more in lobbying, direct lobbying of lawmakers at all levels of government, as well as at electoral engagement. So our C4 arm, our PAC and our Super PAC do engage in electoral politics, just to ensure we are supporting candidates and champions for the environment as they're running for office. The agenda today, we'll talk about bills that are in play around energy and climate issues, how best to communicate about these, just some tips for the trade. But you are all already experts in this as communicators and as people who care already, but this will just be to kind of touch on some of those things to remember when we're doing advocacy with decision makers. Then I'll turn it over to Chris to talk about redistricting and a healthy democracy, why that's so important to securing a healthy environment. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So I will talk a little bit about bills. Now, House Bill 6, I think everybody's probably aware of that legislation. It was a very controversial bill that went through the legislature in a very short period of time in the spring and summer of 2019. It was in law, and then scandal broke a year later that this was actually a bill that was passed under very dubious circumstances, $61 million bribery and racketeering scheme. Former Speaker Householder, who is still a lawmaker, actually. He's still serving in the legislature. He's no longer the Speaker of the House. And several colleagues or several lobbyists that were arrested around the same time under the investigation of the FBI. We do expect to see or hear, or at least rumored, that there will be additional indictments associated with that bribery and racketeering scheme. And coming off of that, you know, us as advocates for clean energy and for climate change, it was really a head scratcher on how a bill could pass so quickly with so much opposition, not just environmental groups, but consumer groups and also renewable energy companies and just kind of your standard fare companies in the state of Ohio. But since then, you know, the bill passed. There's been a lot of activity at the State House to repeal that legislation, but also some hopeful legislation to move us forward. And again, some new attacks, different attacks on clean energy. So I'll walk through some of these. And there's going to be bill numbers, but I did the best I could to summarize these. And of course, all these slides will be available to you after this. So you don't necessarily have to take furious notes. But House Bill 6 has been partially repealed. There was one bill, House Bill 128, that recently was signed into law by the governor. It repealed nuclear subsidies that went to the First Energy Corporation or their affiliate. It repealed a provision that provided even more revenue of profit for the First Energy Corporation. It amended but retained new solar subsidies that were part of House Bill 6, and it enacted new provisions, actually thanks to the championing of a local representative of yours, Cedric Denson, to curb excessive utility profits. He was successful to get this amendment in the bill with some other colleagues from the Cleveland area. And thankfully, that means that utilities no longer have the ability to really rack up the profits, and that they have to essentially curb that and ensure that they're keeping bills steady and even as much as they can for the consumer. This bill did not address the main reason why we oppose this legislation. It did not restore any incentives for renewable energy or any funding for energy efficiency programs. And it didn't repeal the coal subsidies that we're all paying on our bills to support 2 coal plants, one in Southern Ohio and one in Southern Indiana. So those are the I would say the most egregious components to the environment, and those still are law, unfortunately. So it was only a partial repeal, and this was a bill that our affiliate OEC Action Fund opposed through to the end, but we acknowledge that it was a good thing for consumers, especially on the nuclear subsidies piece. So now the bright side. There are some bills that have been introduced that are good for the environment, good for clean energy, good for climate change. These 2 bills here at the top, there is general and bipartisan support for electric vehicle infrastructure. If we're to have more transition from fossil-based or combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles, we need more charging stations throughout the state. So how do we get that? So these 2 bills provide rebates for any businesses or entities that want to install an EV charging station at their business or at a local government site. Second bullet here is right now, local governments can actually go into direct contracts to build new renewable projects, but they're limited in the length of contracts that they can go into. Senate Bill 20 and House Bill 87 actually lengthen that to enable local governments to make longer term investments in renewable energy. So that's a good thing. Lastly, another local representative of yours, State Representative Lou Blessing, he has introduced legislation to make it easier for folks who are living in condominium and homeowners associations, those neighborhoods, to prohibit those entities from banning rooftop solar. So this is a very pro-consumer, pro-homeowner, pro-condo owner bill that would ensure that if you wanted to do rooftop solar, that your homeowners association can't bar you from doing that. We're also on the horizon, we'll see hopefully some more bills introduced this General Assembly that deal with all of these good things down here on the last bullet. Now on to the new attack. So one thing that when people who I guess are emboldened by House Bill 6, you know, House Bill 6 passed, but there really wasn't a political fallout or repercussions from that, unfortunately. So the folks who are very anti-renewable energy just keep on going. What's the next frontier for them? So we have two bills introduced, one in the House, one in the Senate, that would allow for a local referenda on wind and solar projects. So this essentially would be if a large-scale wind or solar developer wanted to invest millions of dollars in a project and go through the state permitting process, this would allow local governments to essentially allow a popular vote to block that project from getting built. So we think this is very bad. No business, you know, private sector business would invest the amount of money that it would take to develop one of these projects to only get the rug pulled out from under them at the end of the day. So we feel it's very harmful for just the general renewable energy marketplace in Ohio. The last two sets of bills are also kind of inverse, weirdly. When you take these things together, it's very interesting. So on the one hand, they want to say that local governments can veto wind and solar projects, but on the other hand, they want to say that local governments cannot prohibit natural gas infrastructure build-outs or fossil fuel-based generation. And so it's a very interesting dichotomy. And it really, when you're thinking of these two moves, you know, as a whole, there doesn't really seem to be a philosophy on what the legislature wants or what the role of local government is versus state oversight. So very confusing kind of attacks, but it's coming out all fronts. And we obviously like to point out that there is contradictions in political approaches here in philosophy. So I will, I know that was a lot of content. Again, please know that you'll get these slides and we can go back to these if anyone wants to revisit these concepts. Certainly feel free to follow our lobbying arm, our OEC Action Fund arm that puts out statements on legislation. That's where we do our lobbying and our position statements on various pieces of legislation. But I want to focus this next short couple of slides to focus really on, you know, how to utilize your assets as a person who cares, an advocate, to educate lawmakers and decision makers on the issues you care about, and also how to tell a good story and what are effective ways to advocate on these issues. So I would say that it's hard sometimes to think about yourself as a storyteller, but everybody has a reason. If you meditate on it long enough or pray on it long enough, you can see or understand kind of what drives you. And I would say don't undersell that. That is probably one of the most powerful aspects of being an advocate, is to really be able to articulate why you care about these issues. Some of us are moved by science and data, but most of us are moved by emotion and the things in our values, the things that we care about the most. And so communication is not just, I have this funny cartoon here, and I'll get to it in a minute. But communication, I wish it was just taking the information that we had in our head and transferring it over to the head of a decision maker, but it's not that easy. We have to use language and messengers that we feel as though will persuade them and bring them over to our side. So this cartoon, I like to put it up here because I think it says two things to me. So first it says, language matters. The words that we use really matter. They can be a way in, but they can also be a way that we get people to like resist or dig into their own entrenched position. But it also says to us, we don't need to be too tricky with our language, because at the end of the day, who we're speaking to, especially if they're a policymaker or decision maker, they're gonna get it. So we can't like trick them into thinking a certain way or being fooled that this is an issue or what we're trying to say or what we care about is different than what is reality. They'll figure it out. So this guy coming into this torture chamber is going to get it right away that it's not just a procedure, right? What we're really talking about here is something that's much more painful than that. So I think that the emphasis there is really about, using terms that are relatable for people. Start with a story, and we'll get to that in a minute, but what's familiar to them, what's descriptive, and staying away from jargon. And again, staying away from kind of the data and statistics that can just kind of go in one ear and out the other. So my tip, whenever we do lobby days or have done them in the past, or my advice to folks is find that one compelling statistic from a trusted messenger that you can use time and again. Don't feel as though if you're going in to advocate on an issue that you need to research it to death and get all the facts and figures and statistics, charts and graphs. Those things don't move a large sector of the population. So find one thing that you feel that can reinforce your point and reinforce the values that you want to put out there. The other thing I think that especially environmental advocates is, if we're focused on the bad that could happen, the doom and gloom, the sky is falling rhetoric, it can paralyze people, honestly, especially decision makers. And it can be a way to alienate them and focusing on why I care, what is the good solution to this problem, and what is the way that we can get there together. And not to focus on, focus too much on the consequences of inaction, or if a bill were to pass, like, the sky will fall. So this is a critical component of kind of the best way to articulate the concerns that you have. And to be honest, there's enough negative information out there that can be very debilitating, even for those of us that really care. And then again, getting back to the storytelling, I think that stories help make your message more relevant, more vivid. It's a way to connect with your audience and allows them to create empathy and to be open to new perspectives and to be open to really hearing you. Your personal story, like I said, don't underestimate it. I think that the way that we come to these issues as people really comes from personal experiences, and those are super valuable. It's not, that you're a scientist and you're coming up with these big conclusions, but you're a person who cares and you want to see a world and you have a vision for what the world can be like if we have more action on environmental issues. For lawmakers, just for a couple of tips, I put these pictures up here because this picture here on your left-hand side is an event that we did at an energy efficiency training facility up in Parma, Ohio. And when we brought lawmakers to this place to really show them what is a clean energy job, what is it? And most of our clean energy jobs in Ohio are actually in the energy efficiency sector. They're not the folks that work on big, tall turbines, which is much more exciting visual. But we wanted to show what the real clean energy economy looks like. And so we went to this training facility As you can see in the background, it's a lot of conversation, a lot of interaction with people who are in this training facility, learning how to become an HVAC or a compressed air or a chilled water systems technician. This is all energy efficiency. It's all about taking the homes and businesses in Ohio, making them the most energy efficient as possible, and creating good paying jobs, skilled trades of people who are not going to see their job exported because the work will always be done right here with buildings in Ohio. So it was a great message, but we have to create ways for decision makers to see, feel, touch, taste what we're trying to say. So another part of the story in that storytelling that we want to do. So if you have a chance, if you're doing advocacy on, say, a stream protection, invite your local lawmaker, decision maker out to walk along the shores with you, to see it, to experience it. It's a very powerful way that people can learn. And then this is my one of my favorite slides I like to put up here. First of all, for two reasons. The visual, the photo is a hopeful one for me, because as much as this issue of energy policy and energy advocacy, clean energy advocacy in Ohio, I like to remember that we're part of a global community, and there are places in the world where they are going from not a coal-fired power plant or fossil fuel dependent energy system. They're going from no electricity to a distributed, renewable, and clean grid. You could see, I think this picture was taken in southern India, or someplace in India, where they had really they have no electricity infrastructure, and they're building it very democratically. They're putting in solar panels to supply renewable energy at the site of where they're using it, which is a very exciting and revolutionary way that we are producing and consuming electricity, much different than we are here. So we can leapfrog ahead. Progress can feel very slow, but when things click, it can move at lightning speed. And then the last one is kind of the inverse of that, which is it takes a lot of time. This quote from 1916, John Burroughs, is that, the vision for a cleaner energy future is a long one. It's one that has its roots from a century or more ago, and we're still working at it. We're getting there, and don't lose hope. It's certainly can feel daunting in the moment, but progress is incremental, but again, it can change in an instant. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris, or Ariel. I'll defer to you on if we wanted to pause for questions or just go through Chris's presentation and then Q&A at the end.
Well, let's let Chris talk and then Q&A at the end, if that would be all right with you.
Yes, that'll work.
That works for me too. That quote that you shared right there at the end, Trish, actually was just making me think immediately about how things like wind power and water power were actually used for thousands of years. People with water wheels or really basic wind turbines on farms and stuff. And now we're shifting back toward that, hopefully. So I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. So there we go. Can you all see this slide? I'm going to be presenting in a second. So then, does this work? Great. All right, so thank you all for having us again. As Ariel said, I'm Chris Tavenor. I'm the staff attorney here at the Ohio Environmental Council, and part of my job has me co-leading our democracy work at the OEC with a number of, it's a team of us that are all working together to really push for democracy initiatives that are with that environmental lens in mind. And so one of the things that we are really focused on this year, and hopefully you all have heard about, is that redistricting is happening this year. And at the OEC, while we are working on legislation and advocating for and against legislation at the State House through our C4 arm and the other work that we do when we're in the cities and at the local level. We are also thinking about how do we ensure that our institutions, our democratic processes are fair and representative of what people need to represent themselves in whatever political body it might be. And so sometimes it's going to be, ensuring that our actual voting processes are fair and that people have access to the ballot. And right now in this year, we are looking at the redistricting process that we all voted on back in 2015 and 2018 for both our state house maps and our congressional maps. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the really clear links between our districts and environmental policy, and then give a brief overview of what the redistricting process is going to look like this year, and especially focusing on some of the opportunities for people to actually engage directly with the process. And then we will pivot into what are the sort of things that we can actually do right now to advocate for fair maps, to build the advocacy tools and the network of people that are ready to advocate for fair maps when the legislature is actually considering fair maps in the fall. So moving along, I wanted to start just with a good example of a very, very gerrymandered district in Ohio. Interestingly enough, this district is very timely because Steve Stivers, who's currently in this district, just announced his resignation. So there will actually be a special election for this district this year. But this district is a really clear example of why Ohio's maps are currently gerrymandered. We see a district that spreads all the way from Athens County all the way almost to where some of you may even live. I see on the very bottom left, there, it looks like there's Lebanon there. It's almost to Lebanon, this district. And then it goes all the way up into Upper Arlington. And actually, where I live in a part of Columbus that's between Upper Arlington and Grandview, the border for this district is about 20 feet that way. And Athens is about 100 or so miles from me. So it's a very large district designed in such a way to scoop communities that aren't really connected to one another and put them into one conglomerate district in order to dilute and mess with the power of the people that are living in those districts. And so this is one of my favorite examples, especially when you look at how it's scooping into central Ohio. It's so blatant in the way that it was designed in order to change who is representing who and ensuring that like communities that are connected to each other in a variety of different ways aren't being represented together. And so how does that kind of play into environmental policy? So I think we all, Trish mentioned House Bill 6, and I'm assuming you all are fairly well read on the craziness that is House Bill 6 over the past 2 years or so. But the reality is that going into House Bill 6 being approved, that was a piece of legislation that when you polled voters about what was going on in that legislation, they overwhelmingly said, no, we want renewable portfolio standards. No, we want clean energy. We want the energy efficiency. We want these sorts of things. But then the legislature went a different direction. And so when you have gerrymandered districts, and this is true for all policy, but environmental policy as well, obviously, you have a legislature that is unresponsive to what the voters want. And this doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. There were Democrats that voted for House Bill 6. And so when you have unresponsive districts, you have a legislature that is able to push through legislation that the people don't actually want. Some other examples from this is actually an example from North Carolina. So North Carolina has a significant issue of coal ash ponds, which are these black dots on the map. So coal ash ponds are leftover ash from coal-fired plants mixed with wastewater and dumped into a pit. These coal ash pond sites exist in areas that are disproportionately low income and Black. In 2014, a pipe under a coal ash pond burst and carried 30,000 tons of toxic wastewater drained into a river in North Carolina. So in 2015, House representatives in North Carolina also passed a bill that would loosen regulation on coal ash ponds, which could lead to another disaster, even as North Carolina residents near coal ash ponds were being told they could not drink their water. Every Republican in North Carolina happened to vote to pass this bill. Every Democrat voted against it. And so the district map on the left, this is their congressional representatives, not their state legislative maps, illustrates how the district map is kind of designed in such a way to dilute the power of people that are, in this instance, you'll notice that the people who were voting against these coal ash ponds are all in play, there's actually most of the black dots here are in districts that were Republican. And so, you can see that gerrymandering in this instance is the people who are most impacted by this environmental injustice are being represented by people who aren't reflecting that issue in their policies. Another example we see here is actually in Dayton. We have, these are the sites of Superfund sites in Dayton. And you can see that in Dayton, there's a significant Black population and some of them actually happen to live close to these Superfund sites. And the way that this is actually the state legislative map in Dayton. It's drawn in a very strange way to disconnect communities. And that is not something it's not giving communities that live close to each other the ability to represent themselves and say, hey, I am these people in this area, we all have similar interests and we want to be representing ourselves together at the legislature. So that brings us to what the redistricting process looks like. So what are we doing? How is this going to work? So back in 2015 and 2018, Ohioans voted on 2 new redistricting processes, both for the state legislature and for the our representatives to Congress. So we'll go over first the General Assembly map drawing process, which is going to be using a bipartisan redistricting commission. So this is Ohio has chosen to go with the bipartisan redistricting approach. Other states use an independent commission to create their redistricting maps. In Ohio, we are going with a redistricting approach that is a commission composed of individuals appointed by the 3 heads of the parties in each of the state legislature chambers. So majority minority party in the House, majority minority party in the Senate, and then the Secretary of State, auditor, and governor. Those 7 people, most likely they may just appoint themselves. They can do that, or they could appoint their friend who they want to represent them. It's really up to them. Most likely they'll appoint themselves though to sit on this commission. And what we've created is this requirement that at least 4 members, including both Democrats, in this instance, it's 2 Democrats and the other 5 will be Republicans. But there could be an instance where, it's a 3-4 split or something like that. At least 4 or more members must vote on the map, including both Democrats. And if that map is passed through, then it's a 10-year map. But the key thing to note about any map that is proposed to this independent redistricting commission, there must be public hearings on the map after the map has been introduced. So there's a clear opportunity for people to give input on these maps. And then there's a few other, if the map doesn't get approved in that first initial process, then you can there's a few bifurcated methods of where okay, if they don't agree, then they have another 14 days with more hearings. And if they can't get any sort of bipartisan agreement, then they can pass a 4-year map without any bipartisan support. But if that 4-year map has rules that it must follow, and we'll go over those a little bit later, but that's just actually right here. Sorry, I forgot the order of my slides. So if they force through a map that isn't voted on with bipartisan support, then there's all of these rules that they must meet. And some of these rules actually apply even if they don't have bipartisan support, but the eye is especially close on some of these rules if there is no bipartisan support. But it's things like contiguous and compact districts, that thing that we see in that, and then I know that's a congressional district, but those tactics are used at the state legislative level too, where you've got these snaking, winding district parts where they're diving into sections. That's violating this idea of a compact district. You're clearly diving into a section to pull it out and put it in another district. Then there's also rules about when you can split counties. Ideally, you're following county, municipal, and township boundaries. And then there is this great little line of no map can disfavor one party over the other. And then for the state legislative maps specifically, this is not a rule for the congressional maps. The state legislative maps must have representational fairness based on the preference of Ohio voters from the preceding decade. So right now, one of the most egregious things with our state legislature is you can see the data of, okay, roughly 55% of Ohioans have voted Republican and roughly 45% have voted Democrat. So ideally, we would expect a state legislature that's like 55-44 or maybe 53-46 or something like that. I did my math right there. Yes. But we're seeing, I believe, Trish, correct me if I'm wrong on this number. It's what, 69 Republicans to 30 Democrats?
Yeah, there's 99 House representatives, and yeah, that's the split. It's very lopsided.
And so, and when you have that, then you have a supermajority that is able to dictate policy and not have more compromise policy that is working with both sides of the aisle. And so it'll be interesting to see how that particular clause plays out when we go through the redistricting process. So for the congressional maps, the congressional map process will occur after the state legislative map drawing process. And this one is actually going to occur in the state house itself, not with an independent commission, though the independent commission, not in the bipartisan commission, plays a minor role in one of the steps here. So for the congressional redistricting process, they have to get at least 60% of support in each chamber with at least 50% support of, in the language of the Constitution, it says minority party. And in this instance, it's the Democrats. And if they are able to all agree on a map like that, then it'll be a 10-year map. But then once again, there's this opportunity for public hearings where the public can be participating in the redistricting process. The Ohio governor can veto the map, which is worth noting. If it fails to get through that process, then it goes to that redistricting commission, which will be the same 7 people mentioned earlier. But in order to, and so then it has the at least 4 more members, including both Democrats, and that map can be 10 years. Once again, more public hearings are required. If the redistricting commission cannot agree on a map, then it goes back to the legislature. There is a lessened requirement of the number of minority party members that must approve the map. For it to be a 10-year map. Oh, sorry, I advanced too soon. And then if they cannot get bipartisan support, then it once again creates that 4-year map that must be reconsidered later in the decade. And there are additional rules regarding what that map can look like. So criteria for the congressional maps, some of these are a little bit more specific than the state legislative maps, but you'll notice that they actually specified that 65 of Ohio's counties must be kept whole. They can't be split. 18 counties can be split once, 5 counties may be split twice. Those county splits are going to be really key, I would imagine, especially around some of the suburban counties, around cities. Those are probably where we're going to see a lot of the county splits. Also, the cities themselves are going to be split. Some of the counties like Franklin County, Hamilton County, Cuyahoga County are too large to have themselves in just one district. But they will most likely have one district entirely contained within themselves, and then the other counties around them will be split and have some of the extras. And so how we advocate for maps and where those splits occur is going to be really key for thinking about, what communities should be with which other communities. And there's some other rules that get here, noting that if a congressional district, this one's kind of interesting, includes a part of a county, that part of the congressional district that lies within the county must be contiguous within the bounds of the county. That one's a little weird. So essentially it's saying you can't have a district that dives into one part of a county and then on like the other side of the county dives in and they're not connected within the county. You can't do that anymore. Some of the districts currently do that. So here's some more rules. Once again, it's more of these rules about like how counties can be split. But once again, we get this language under the step 4. If the legislature pushes it through with a simple legislative majority, no map can unduly favor one political party or incumbents. You can't split political subdivisions in certain ways. You got to draw compact districts. And this is my favorite one. The legislature must include its congressional district plan an explanation about how it complied with all the preceding rules. The Ohio voters actually put into the Constitution a requirement that the General Assembly shows its work, kind of like taking them back to elementary school. You got to show your work for how you did your math. So that's what the redistricting process looks like. I think it's always helpful so people know that there's all these rules in place for how these maps can be built, but there's obviously still a lot of wiggle room for legislators to make a map that isn't truly representative of people that live in Ohio. And so the timeline for the year is that right now, people are learning about this process and learning about how they can engage and when it's going to occur. And the key thing for people to be thinking about is, how can communities work together throughout Ohio to define themselves, illustrate what they care about, what their geographic scope is, what are the other communities nearby that they're connected with, that have like interests or values. And so how can we clearly say, okay, these are the communities, these communities shouldn't be split in half. One of the best examples in Central Ohio is that Clintonville is a community in Central Columbus that is currently represented by 2 representatives. It's just split in half. It's not that big of a neighborhood, but there's just a line straight down the middle, and that doesn't particularly make sense. That community should be represented together. So once we get through that public education phase, and then we get into the summer and the fall, there will be public hearings put on by the legislature that anyone can participate in. And there's going to be a lot of really great ways for people to engage and represent, hey, this is my community, don't split it apart. There's going to be map drawing competitions that I believe that the League of Women Voters is going to be putting on. People can draw their own district maps and participate in that way. You can come to a hearing and be like, I made this map, it's great. You should vote on this one instead of the one that you made, whatever you want to do. But then there's also decision maker education, talking to your representatives, talking to the people who are going to play a key decision in this process and say, hey, here's what I think fair maps should look like. Oh, how are you thinking about fair maps? Get them thinking about these values that you think should be instilled in maps to ensure that people are represented fairly and equitably. So reminder on the timeline, the Redistricting Commission for the General Assembly map adopts by September 15th, 2021. That's the final deadline. The Ohio General Assembly will adopt its congressional map by November 30th. So we're really not that far away. We're talking 6 months, 7 months now. So I just want to note real quick before we move on to the next part, you may have heard about the census delay that is impacting the redistricting process a little bit. There's still negotiations going on as to when the data is going to come out, who's going to get the data. Organizations like the OEC are advocating for, we need good data. It should be good data. We also shouldn't be short-circuiting any of the redistricting process. So some people are throwing around the idea of, oh, we should have less public hearings, or we should move dates back or move it up or whatever. And the whole point is, we have time to figure out a process where we get both good data and we still have the public engagement that we voted on in 2018 and 2015. So we shouldn't compromise on either of those objectives. So how can we participate in this process? Because this is one of the best ways that we can kind of resolve some of the issues and frustrations that people might be having about things like clean energy policy and stuff. Right away, think about the key decision makers and how you can influence them. These are the 7 individuals that are on that redistricting commission for the state legislature. We've got the governor, governor, auditor, secretary of state, the 4 party leaders in each of the chambers. These are the people that have a role in the state legislative maps, and then also that other additional role in the congressional map process. But then also the thing that is the most important right now is for people to start thinking about their community. From the OEC's perspective, we like thinking about this through the environmental lens. What are the environmental assets that communities have that are in your proximity? That's why I have here a map of the principal streams and drainage areas of Ohio. I think this is an ODNR map, just showcasing, how can people think about these environmental aspects of their communities, and how, what if just throwing out like ideas of like, what would it look like if we ensured that everyone who had a drinking water source, they were all represented by the same legislator? Like thinking about those sorts of approaches to redistricting. But in particular, there's a very clear method for us to advocate right now for redistricting, which is by actually creating community maps that define what your community is and how you want your community to be represented. I actually believe that link is the wrong link and I'll need to fix it. But I'm actually going to switch us. Actually, maybe before we do this, depending on the time, we might have time for me to actually showcase how this tool works if people are interested, but I want to make sure we have a good amount of time for questions. But what the OEC is doing, we are pushing for people, and we're doing this with a variety of different organizations as well, is to get people to define their communities with this map making tool called District R, where you can actually paint on the screen what your community is, the important locations, the environmental assets, thinking about what there could be more of, what there is less of, how these things could be improved, who lives there, what type of people, who they care about. And these maps are actually going to be used by academics at Ohio State and Tufts University to build out a community map, district map at the end of all of this that is like, hey, this is the data we gathered from people across Ohio. And using this data, we've created maps that don't break up communities of interest. And so we can talk about this a little bit more. I'll just give you an example of what this looks like. I made a map of where I live in Columbus, where you can see I mapped out, this is this little neighborhood in Columbus called 5th by Northwest that is stuck between Upper Arlington and Grandview Heights, two fairly affluent suburbs of Columbus. This little section of Columbus that I live in kind of gets lost and forgotten between these two suburbs. It's a lot of college students, mostly renters. It's kind of commercialized in a lot of aspects. It's got OSU to the right. Most of there's a few things in this area, but most of the things and like resources actually, and like green space is actually in Grandview or in Upper Arlington or up along the river near Ohio State. And so this just is like, here's the community map I drew. And this is a community map, and its aspects and things that people care about here should be considered. I've been thinking about in my mind, does it make sense for this community to be represented alongside Grandview and Upper Arlington, or does it make sense to be represented alongside Ohio State? I'm not sure, but that's something to think about given the way this community interacts with all of those groups. So, and then this actually shows what that state legislative map looks like right now. Right now, my neighborhood is represented by the same representative as Grandview, but then you notice that Upper Arlington is in a different district, Marble Cliff is in a different district, and then OSU is in a different district. And there's different thoughts on how that might go, but my apartment is right in this area, and I have literally, I'm like 20 feet from 3 different districts, which I find interesting. That's kind of coincidental, but that's the way it worked out. So as I said, if we have time and if people are interested, I can give a little bit more tutorial about that District R map tool. But the key is that people should be talking to their friends and family and community about the importance of redistricting. We can create those maps that both district maps and community maps. People could talk about legislators and other decision makers about redistricting. And there's also going to be a ton of opportunities for people to engage in redistricting, both with that, with these community maps, but then in the future, those public hearings that are occurring in the fall and late summer. And the goal is that through fair maps, we can achieve equitable and effective environmental policy. So I will just end and we can transition into questions that I want to emphasize. If you're interested in doing some sort of community map making thing with your communities, I know some of you are connected with religious organizations. So if like even like congregations, I'm happy to run like a Zoom call kind of like this to actually run communities through the redistricting, the District R tool to define people's communities, because it's honestly really fun. People have a lot of fun like talking about where they live and the environmental assets there and building these community maps that they can then use later on to advocate for redistricting. So I'll just end there. If we have time, if people want to see the tutorial, we can do that. But I think transitioning to questions would probably be best.
Thank you so much, Trish and Chris. I would like to just add to what Chris said. We're hearing from all on the line. Ohio's team is that the state legislature is delaying the appropriation of money needed to do public education about this redistricting process. And they're using the census delay as an excuse. And we can't let them do that. We have to demand that public education begin on the new process. And we can't allow them to do it. Do you know the legislator who's sitting on that appropriation? I forget his name.
Yeah, the chair of that committee, I forget the name off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure Trish Sykes is the minority leader on that.
It's
committee.
not Sykes. It's a man.
No, I
Which-
know.
Is it Senate Finance or House Finance?
No, there's a specific like redistricting task force. I can get the answer for you on that question really fast.
And put it in the chat. Trish, can I start with a question for you, please? Can you tell us some words that legislators hostile to environmental concerns can safely use and not lose face with their base? You know, kind of for smart energy policy.
Yeah, so so these are you're asking, Ariel, best words to use when approaching someone that's hostile to clean energy, like how to talk about it.
Yeah. The energy efficiency jobs, so jobs might be one of them, or whatever.
Yeah, jobs are good. We like to use the word careers because, you know, one critique of especially large scale renewable energy projects will create X amount of jobs, but a lot of those are temporary construction jobs. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the clean energy industry, we talk about clean energy careers. Mm-hmm. So careers for energy efficiency are things like skilled technicians for HVAC controls, chilled and water heating systems. I stumbled over that. And careers are, I think, longer term in people's minds. You know, you think of someone that works in some traditional fossil energy, like a coal miner or, you know, a pipeliner. These are labels, you know, that seem to stick in people's minds as like a career trajectory. And so careers can be better than jobs. I also think that talking about, you know, I think it really matters which legislator, because some of them, this doesn't really help them, but talking about like corporations, large businesses, large employers in Ohio, the big job creators are all moving towards renewable energy and sustainability goals. It's expected of them. It is just a demand that consumers have. These are global brands, especially the bigger companies. I think of Procter & Gamble down in Cincinnati. Everybody knows Procter & Gamble. They all know P&G. These are household names. They have very aggressive sustainability goals. How are we as a state going to ensure that they can access clean energy in Ohio, you know, where they're employing people and where their core business is? So with others, I would say, I think from people, talking about care for the environment is lawmakers, especially the ones that are anti-renewable energy, you don't have a good retort when we're like, hey, clean air. No one wants to have asthma. No one wants to be faced with dirty water. It's kind of a basic human right to have access to clean air and clean water. And whenever we go down that path with a lawmaker, they have to agree with us. They're like, yes, of course we want clean water. Of course we want clean air. No, they can't come out and say like, no, we're fine with dirtier air. We're fine with dirty water. And so if you stick with those messages, it's very difficult for them to disagree with you.
Who has questions?
While we wait on someone coming up with a question, I was just thinking maybe they want some taste to their water, Trish.
That oily residue.
Right.
I have two questions. I'll put them both out there if we have time for both. That'd be great. One is, you know, obviously the end of November does not leave a whole ton of time until the 2022 election. And so I'm just curious, like, if that is influencing when candidates are announcing, or if they're just going for it and see where the chips fall. And then the other question is, Trish, you mentioned some solar subsidies in the partially repealed House Bill 6 that you said were amended, but not something. And if you could give a little more detail about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'll answer the redistricting question first. And this is where the census delay can kind of play an interesting role. Right now, the real like hard deadline that the legislators are going to be running up against with this census delay is when legislators have to officially file their candidacy for the primary, which I believe is a date somewhere in February. I believe the date's actually dictated by the number of days before the primary. And so one of the things that could occur instead of changing instead of like short circuiting the redistricting schedule is Ohio could consider pushing the primary date back, giving legislators more time to file, and then the redistricting process could actually occur a little bit longer leading so that there's more time before those filing deadlines. And so that's one thing that could be explored. But yeah, I would say that there are some representative candidates that have already declared that they're running for particular districts that don't actually exist yet. I think that's just, normal campaign tactics. They're trying to get their name out there early, even though who knows what their constituency is actually going to be. They're going to be in a district. What that district is, I think, is a different question.
Then, Brian, to answer your question, the bill that passed that partially repealed House Bill 6 retained new solar energy subsidies that were part of House Bill 6, but it tinkered with them a little bit, changed a little bit around them. And those were interesting kind of concessions in the original House Bill 6. They were these new state subsidies that were, going to be funded by charges on people's bills, but there were only about six specific solar projects that were eligible for those new subsidies. So we didn't think it was a good, exchange or substitution for a statewide renewable portfolio standard, because it really was just limiting 6 projects, giving them incentives or giving them state subsidies. And it was grossly, underwhelming when you compare it to the sheer solar potential of the state of Ohio, which is much bigger than just 6 projects.
Nadja has a great question. Nadja, do you want to unmute and read it, or you can see it in the chat?
Yeah.
I have written letters to my representatives on issues. I don't really feel like, it doesn't feel very effective. So I guess I'm curious on your thoughts on how effective that is. Is it better to call? Usually it's an answering machine. You just leave something on a machine. You talked earlier about talking with your representatives. It's not something, I don't bump into them in my daily life, So, how can someone who's got a day job, go and I'm sure this applies to all of us, frankly, but what's the best way to be helpful and effective, really?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Sometimes, especially during the pandemic, it's been very difficult to feel like our lawmakers are accessible. Because in the old days, pre-pandemic, I'd be like, spend a day during a session day at the State House and just camp out until you see the person and grab them in the hallway. But really, I think it starts with that personal touch. Try to get to know them in a personal way if you want to put in the effort. And it does take a little bit of effort. So I think my best advice is to find out when they are holding an in-district event. Most state lawmakers will keep kind of coffee open hours at a local library or some other public venue. And again, this is pre-pandemic. I don't know if they're doing this really now, but they would hold times to meet with constituents, and it was basically walk in and just have a conversation with them. In lieu of that, my second best advice is to do the personal touch. Letters are good. Phone calls and getting to know their staff actually might even be a little bit better. Getting to know who answers their phone or who answers their voicemails, actually, and having a rapport with them and getting to know them may get you a higher likelihood of actually getting a phone call with that person, or when we can do it more, safely is an in-person meeting with that person. I do think that letters, having worked in the Senate, so I did work in the Senate, I worked for Democratic senators. I was amazed at how seriously some of those senators took constituent outreach. They took careful attention to reply to every inquiry, at least to respond. If you're not getting that, then just, I would say, be consistent, be respectful. Sometimes, depending on who they are, they may be very busy committee chair people, and it's just tougher to get in with them. But that personal touch and getting to know their staff are my best advice right now.
I wanted to add in just real quick that I think there's different legislators are going to respond and interact with people differently. But like one example that I can just think of off the top of my head is my wife actually last year wanted to get in contact with a Columbus City Council member, and she tried a number of them, and one of them actually did get back to her and scheduled a Zoom call, and they had like an hour-long chat about things. And like, so it's some of them are going to be more responsive than others, but like it is possible to schedule those sorts of one-on-one chats. Sometimes it's just gonna, sometimes it takes trying more than once to set up those calls. And Trish's point about badgering the staff, I'm pretty sure she had a number of back and forths with the legislative aide for the council member before the call was scheduled.
But I think framing again is important, and reading the home pages that they have in the Ohio legislature website tells you what they're proud of and what they care about. And if you can position what you're recommending in terms of something that they're establishing as their brand, as it were, that's respectful and shows that you're interested in a two-way conversation, don't you think?
Yeah, very much. Two-way conversation is great. And
Susan brought up a great question.
Yeah, Susan, go ahead. One last thing before you dive in, Chris, the one last thing I'll say about just establishing good relationships with lawmakers, or at least having a way in with them, is going together. So you as a private citizen may not rise on a priority list than, say, if you were to join together with folks with a common interest. And if you are a set of constituents coming in jointly, you might have better success in getting that one-on-one. Okay,
and they may not be used to hearing from the religious community on this issue.
Right.
So if you say you're a faith-based citizen or constituent, maybe that will be startling to them.
So Susan, on your question about what brought about the redistricting legislation that we described. So I would say, so redistricting reform has been tried a few times in Ohio. I do believe there was actually an initial attempt back in like the 70s, a long time ago, that actually failed. And I think there may have been an earlier try in the mid 2000s, but really the push in 2015 and 2018 was 100% in response to what happened in 2011. There's a number of stories out there about how our current legislative maps were drawn. I believe essentially, like, it's not a joke to say that they literally drew the maps in a hotel room. And it was like 3 people drew the maps and then got forced through, no public input, no real like consideration of communities and who should be represented by who, and what communities are being split apart. It was just the maps got rolled out. They used really advanced software to build these maps that were designed to disproportionately favor one party over the other. There were a number of lawsuits that rolled out over the past few years over, maps in other states, and Ohio's maps were part of those lawsuits. I forget the exact details of how far it went up the courts. But in one of the cases for the suing over the maps in Ohio was essentially they had run simulations on possible iterations of how our maps could look. And it was something like there were only like 3 possibilities to create the maps that we had. All of the other maps would have resulted in more equitable distribution of representation. And like essentially that it was like 3 million possibilities, and like only 3 would have been as egregiously gerrymandered as the ones that we got. And so that like reality that they just forced through these maps created a ton of organizations to really put their resources together to put these constitutional amendments on the ballot for people to vote on. And so it's not actually legislation, it's constitutional amendments that people voted on. 2015, it was done through signature gathering processes, I believe. And then in 2018, it initially was a signature gathering operation, but then the legislature brought the leaders of those groups, including our executive director was actually one of the lead negotiators of the 2018 constitutional amendment, and the legislature proposed an amendment to the Constitution that Ohio voters voted upon. And so that's the background of all of this. And I will, before I talk about Rashida's question, I'll kick it over to the other question that was asked in the chat that I think is probably for Trish.
Yeah,
Actually,
and Jonathan is a graduate student at Xavier, so he has access to a lot of people.
great. Yeah, Chris, actually, why don't, since you're on a roll, why don't you go to Rashida's question?
Yeah. So you said, are there recommendations for C3 appropriate activities that organizations and faith-based institutions can engage in around redistricting? Everything is C3 for redistricting. Like this is, so especially the community map making stuff that I was emphasizing at the end, that is all C3. That is communities getting together, talking about what their communities are, who they live around, their assets, their environmental resources, all of those things, and then submitting that to the academics for them to work on. Like that's C3. That is like, honestly, like it is like, so we've done a few of these map making sessions so far, and they are so much fun to see people lighting up, talking about their communities. Like there was one person who was talking about their region in Cleveland. They were talking about how it's this suburb of Cleveland that kind of gets lost between these other more affluent suburbs. It used to be this way, and now it's kind of like things have changed a little bit, but here's the resources that we really care about, this park along the river. And like they just get energized talking about it. And then they're like, yeah, and our community's been split up by this district and this district. And you know, it's really cool. And all that C3. Now there are rules about, you know, how C3 organizations, the amount of lobbying at the legislature you can do, but C3s can do some lobbying. You know, you got to figure out your C3's rules on that. So like when the actual public hearings occur in the summer and fall, C3 representatives can go testify on behalf of these maps. These maps will technically be legislation because they're being passed by the legislature, but it's still C3 friendly. That's you're not engaging in partisan politics. You're not advocating on behalf or for one particular candidate. So that's the thing that I would emphasize there.
And if you all need advice on that, we have great attorneys like Chris and our general counsel who can help work through any kind of C3, C4 questions. Certainly speaking up for fair maps, just generally speaking, and steering clear of saying vote for or vote against a particular piece of legislation will keep you in that C3 territory.
And the same, similarly, don't be like, you know, vote for fair maps so we can get X person out of office. Like, yeah, don't say that. Like that's not the goal. The goal is to create maps that represent people. It may still be that that person is the representative, but like they should be representing their community, not picking who they're voting, who they're representing.
Yeah. So Jonathan, to your question, this is about the larger religious community. What are the main asks to pass along in terms of bills or legislators to target right now? And the main focus, you know, for where we should be putting our attention. I would say the biggest threat right now to the future of clean energy in Ohio and our response to climate change is these local referenda on wind and solar projects. This is House Bill 118 and Senate Bill 52. Again, C3, C4 split, I think it would be really important to have many voices talking about the need to be a state that we can see a more diverse energy portfolio, where we can attract businesses that want to invest big in these types of projects in our state. We're well-resourced with a good, solid workforce. We have very good wind, we have very good solar resources, and we have communities that are ready to put people to work in the clean energy industry. So those bills are really, in terms of the lawmakers that are making decisions about that, in the House, it still largely is a local representative to you all, which is Bill Seitz. Representative Bill Seitz, interestingly, is one of the most successful anti-wind advocates in the state of Ohio in our history. But on solar, he actually likes it, interestingly. So if you can appeal to him on solar energy, I would encourage that. Our goal is to have a level playing field for all generation resources. And these two bills certainly make a very unlevel playing field. And they are I guess, an extra hard blow to wind energy, which Representative Seitz certainly will think that's great. But, it's making Ohio, I think generally speaking, it's making Ohio look very in the dark ages. Every state around us in the Midwest, whether they're led by a Democrat or a Republican governor, are moving ahead with clean energy in a very, very aggressive pace. Or they are creating investment in free market environments to allow those industries just to take hold, which is, and they're not doing things to block them. So in Ohio, we have, lawmakers that say they're for an open and free market on these things, but will take steps to put extra regulatory burden on them to really ensure that they don't come here. The other bills are interesting. I'm not sure they will go very far. The local referenda bills certainly feel like they're the most pressing. In the Senate, the reason is that the Senate President, Matt Huffman, who's from Lima, Ohio, which is interesting also where the Speaker of the House is from, Lima, Ohio. The center of power of our state government is Lima, Ohio. There's a solar project that's proposed for that area that has gotten a lot of local, opposition, but also has a lot of local support. But of course, the louder voices coming from that project are the local opposition. So getting out there, talking about that and talking about it through the lens that all from, like I said, that personal story, care for the environment, cleaner air, transition to cleaner energy future, response to climate change. All of those things are really powerful messages in that debate.
Rashida had another question about the role of the faith communities in redistricting.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked this. So I'm trying to think of the coalitions that we're working in, if there's any religious or faith-based groups in them right now. And I can't think of any off the top of my head. I know UUJO gets involved a lot. I think they're involved in the Ohio Voting Rights Coalition pretty heavily. Faith in Public Life will some. I will say, if you are interested in getting more involved in this stuff, the Equal Districts Coalition that we are connected with is always looking for more groups to join. They also have small grant opportunities for people if they want to do the sort of community map making, public education outreach. That if a group says, hey, yeah, we're ready, we have the resources to train a few people to run these, and then you run a certain number of sessions, like they're looking for grant applicants for that. Though I believe the deadline is April 29th, but if anyone wants to chat more about that, I can connect you with the right people. But yeah, they're looking for more people to participate, and especially in the four corners of Ohio. A lot of the groups that are engaged in this are kind of centered in Columbus. And so they're always looking for more people that are not in Columbus to be able to participate in this stuff, because it would suck if all of the data we gather is just like Central Ohio. Like we need data from all across Ohio to build out what these communities are looking like. And so I would encourage you all, if you're interested in doing more of this, that there may be an opportunity for you to participate if you want to. But regardless, we are happy to help you facilitate community map making if you want. And it would be really cool to have kind of that, like, you know, the faith-based environmental spin. Like if the community is focused around, you know, where the church is and how people connect with that church. Yes, that is my email. Feel free to drop me a note. Yeah, so I think that's a good question. Like there's plenty of opportunities for groups to engage.
So water is a very profound religious image in faith traditions. And I think to look at the Ohio River watershed, for example, what goes in the water on the West Virginia border ends up in the Cincinnati drinking water. But I think if faith communities in the eastern part of the state looked at the Ohio River watershed, we could have some very wonderful things going on, not only on energy, but also fracking and plastics manufacture and so forth. And I know that the Ohio Poor People's Campaign, which is a religious movement, has really been focused on the issues of petroleum or fossil fuel and plastics manufacturing in Eastern Ohio.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Chris is also our lead attorney on the PFAS issue, which is a byproduct of chemical and plastics manufacturing. It does unfortunately flow down the Ohio River, and it is present in so many waterways and drinking water systems in Ohio. So there's a lot of activity there. There's also a lot of work that our water team does on water access and affordability. Especially in the pandemic, you know, having your water utility shut off due to non-payment just seems egregious. If there's such an emphasis first on hygiene during the pandemic, but also people are stuck at home in their homes and apartments. So there's a large group of coalitions, or a large, I would say, cohort of coalitions active in multiple communities and at the state level to end utility shutoffs due to non-payment, particularly with special emphasis on the pandemic. It's a big movement that's happening in Ohio. Chris, did you have anything more to say about PFAS or water quality, Ohio River stuff?
No, I don't think so. You kind of summarized it pretty well, so.
Are there any other questions for our wonderful resource people today?
Yeah, Rob is a great resource on PFAS. Yeah, we had the honor of having him speak at one of our law conferences a few years ago, and he's just he's fantastic when it comes to his long career fighting against the PFAS pollution in Ohio. It's really great.
You talk about careers. He did a wonderful case study for the University of Cincinnati, which had a big forum on involving people in preparing for careers in environmental advocacy. And that included not only toxicologists and epidemiologists, but also novelists, you know, use of the arts in advocacy, which was really great. And I think it was probably recorded. I'll try to find that information and the professor who organized it. But Rob Balat gave a brilliant case study on this in February, I think.
That's awesome. I didn't know that he's on your board. That's
yeah,
amazing.
That's fun.
Very new. He just joined a couple months ago. So we're excited to have him.
You gonna get Mark Wahlberg come hang out with you all?
Oh,
That'd be interesting.
I'd like to add that.
Sorry, not Mark Wahlberg, Mark Ruffalo. Sorry, wrong name.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mark Wahlberg would be really interesting though.
I would like to add that Ariel and I had a wonderful conversation with him, and he shared with us that we should watch the movie The Devil We Know as a wonderful follow-up to his Dark Waters movie, which is very inspiring and entertaining. But the Devil We Know really goes into the facts about that and the behind the scenes information. So if you haven't seen that, I really recommend it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic documentary. I agree. And I think that it does illustrate, you know, thinking about like communities that are impacted by these things in very place-based situations. Like, I mean, PFAS is a worldwide problem now, but like the experience of the people in Southeast Ohio and on the other side of the river in West Virginia that were impacted by that plant, like that is like that is a shared experience that is really real and kind of gets at like, you know, the help that they need to like restore their community is just, that's the sort of thing where it's like, those are the narratives that, not just for like fixing their problem, but like that's the sort of thing where it's like they should be like, I'm just pulling this back to redistricting, like they should be represented together so that they have you know, someone who's fighting for them on like that explicit issue.
Yeah, I would love to see Green Umbrella host him and Mark Ruffalo come and speak, perhaps at a movie theater and show one of the movies, and then have keep them over for the next day and have a plenary session, and maybe we can get a lot of shared funding to make that a reality. And it's no longer called PFAS, it's now Gen X. They've altered it a teeny bit and say, oh, well, Gen X is safer, but of course, no science.
Yeah, so what Gen X is actually a type of PFAS. That's what they're getting away with. Yeah, it's just a different PFAS. Yeah, and yeah. It's like, that's, yeah, they just stick out a new one and say, oh, it's not the one that we used to use.
Yes, and something happened, and we were having that discussion with Rob, is why did those two films disappear? You don't hear about them. And what higher powers in the industry made those films disappear,
including from the award circuit.
Mm-hmm.
Censorship.
Yeah. This was wonderful. This was absolutely wonderful talk. And I'm wondering if our group can organize not just the advocacy group, but all three of our working groups can unite to work towards parts, each taking their own sector and working towards helping reach these goals. With Ariel as our leader.
I think we're all a team, and we'll stay in touch. Certainly, Trish and Chris, will you communicate with Joanne and also with Ryan and Rashida about opportunities to weigh in? If you have ways to include us on a mailing list of your calls to action, that would be really wonderful.
Yeah, certainly. So if you're, we can definitely circulate after this materials. I think the easiest and quickest way is to sign up for our, if you're interested in legislation and lobbying, this would be Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund. Mm-hmm. All of our social media accounts too, we can send you information on that. I would say social media is the quickest way we correspond, but we do action alerts through both OEC and OEC Action Fund on legislation on redistricting, especially. Chris, what would be your recommendation? We kind of, it all comes out through similar channels for us, but
yeah, I would emphasize for redistricting, the number one thing with it comes out in the similar channels, but like if you are interested in doing more on redistricting, like we should schedule a community map making event for your communities, whether that's Green Umbrella as a whole or your specific like religious faith-based organization or congregation that you're working with. Like we cannot do enough of these. Like we need to do as many as possible so that we get as much data to these academics so that they can build out good maps that say, hey, legislators, here's what our district should look like based on values that are supportive. There will also be more formal public hearings for what we're creating an Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission, which will be kind of a public nonprofit based redistricting commission. Unfortunately, the applications for people to join that window passed a few weeks ago. Otherwise, I would be recommending you all to apply. But that I don't know. I don't know who yet's going to be on that commission, but that's going to be rolling out soon, and that's going to be a public facing alternative, like, you know, kind of mock redistricting process where people are going to be going to these hearings, presenting things about their communities, and using these community maps that we're working with people to build to advocate for before this like commission that's built up of people from across the state. And then once that process ends and the actual formal process begins, people will kind of have like their practice advocating for maps, and they can go to the real public hearings and use their data. So like, I can't like understate, you know, I guess, or overstate. And I apologize if you're hearing any hammering. There's people working on my window. Like, please, if you're interested in doing the community map making, reach out to me. And I will also just note that link I shared earlier. I'm going to drop it again. This is the portal for our campaign, the Open Maps campaign. Take a look at it. You could even try your hand at building your own map of your community and then submitting it. Every map counts. It's all really important. And I find it a lot of fun, but I'm kind of a weird map nerd. So
I like maps too. Well, thank you both. This was fantastic. And I'm excited to learn about the work that you all are doing. And I think there's potential for us to collaborate, especially on the redistricting stuff. So definitely we'll be reaching out to you about that. Thank you, Ariel, for organizing this. Great
Thanks
job.
to Joanne for connecting us to OEC, and Trish and Chris, thank you. Hearts out to you, and thank you so much.
thank you.
Likewise.
Know that you're championing our state and our health. And
Right back at you. Yes, thank you all for being so engaged and wanting to take time to learn about this stuff and be really good advocates on this. So really appreciate the involvement and the kinship. I love these types of sessions. So thank you.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care,
you.
everybody.
This was wonderful.
Thanks
Have a
all.
good afternoon, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.